Hello, everyone. This is Alpha Omega. The video I prepared this Saturday morning, right after waking up, is about Rocket Lab. They released their earnings on May 8th. Now, let's take a look at what they've been up to. Before you watch the video, please hit like and subscribe. First of all, it's a full space value chain. So, they say they've completely built a high value-added chain, a full value chain. And here, you can see Neutron, right? They're also saying that with Neutron, they'll be able to produce a huge number of satellites in the future. Next, at present, with Electron, they're launching a lot of rockets. In addition to that, they're also making satellites and solar panels. They're explaining that the company supplies and manufactures various components and software needed for space activities, so just keep that in mind. Next, their 2025 Q1 results just came out, and they made $122.6 million in the first quarter, so they're saying that's a 32% increase compared to the same period last year. And then, they mention that they've launched 5 rockets, 5 launches. And what do they emphasize? They're saying, we have a 100% mission success rate. That just shows how reliable the Electron rocket is. Next up is Neutron. With Neutron, they suddenly start talking about something else. But I'll explain that part in more detail later. Then, they loaded this space capsule onto their Pioneer payload and sent it into space. So, what did they do there? In microgravity, they also manufactured pharmaceuticals. It's probably similar to what Redwire and Philbox are doing right now, but I'll talk more about this later as well. For now, the first section is about Electron. Let's take a look. Alright, as I mentioned earlier, they're saying that it was a 100% mission success. They're promoting this, and if you look here, since 2015 they've launched 63 times, with 59 successes and 4 failures. They also mention that companies that have commissioned launches from them so far include Firefly, Virgin Orbit, and even Northrop Grumman. By highlighting these names, they're basically promoting that they're a trusted company, so just keep that in mind. Next, what they're talking about here is HASTE. Let me change the color a bit. I'll change it like this. And this. HASTE is something I've always mentioned whenever I explain Rocket Lab. So, there was some good news about this, and I'll explain it a bit down here. So, when we talk about HASTE, what they're doing is putting various payloads requested by companies, their customers, on top of the rocket. These payloads come in all different sizes, and they carry them up. But the funny thing is, depending on the payload, you see this lid here. This thing here, in Neutron we call it the Hungry Hippo, and as I mentioned before, it can be custom-made to fit the size of the payload. Now, why do we say the HASTE mission is important? Well, it's based on the Electron rocket. It's described as a launch vehicle for hypersonic and suborbital technology testing. So, you can load hypersonic weapons onto it. You can carry a variety of different payloads for experiments. And that's what the Electron rocket is doing. So, if we look at the major defense projects that Rocket Lab is currently competing for or has already secured, what are they? Right now, they're trying to win contracts with the US Air Force and EWAC. In which area? You can understand it as them competing in the launch-related sector. I briefly visited their website and, sorry about that. Why is EWAC involved in so many projects? Right now, there are actually over 200 companies selected for this. So, I think we can just take it as, oh, that's how it is, and move on. Next, their first overseas expansion case has happened. In Europe, they signed a contract with the UK Ministry of Defence and HTCDF worth $1.3 billion. Next, they've already secured the Mach-TV 2.0 program from the US Department of Defense, which means they can expect about $1.4 billion in revenue. That's how you should understand it. Also, keep in mind that a total of 7 launches are planned here, so when you see news about it, you can think, oh, that's what they were talking about back then. Now, they're also giving an explanation about Neutron. It's currently scheduled for launch in 2025, but we don't know for sure how things will turn out. And Building this right now is costing an enormous amount of money. So, there are also R&D expenses involved. That's why, whether it's EBITDA or net, well, the cash earn rate is actually quite high. I'll talk more about that a bit later on. So, even though the Neutron hasn't had a test launch yet, it has already secured a $5.6 billion national security space launch contract. That's unusual, right? The rocket isn't even built yet, but they've already landed the contract. This is likely from the Department of Defense. The scale of this is massive. It's $5.60 billion. This is an IDIQ contract. I've explained this later, but let's look just a moment. So, the contract structure is IDIQ, which stands for indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. That means delivery and quantity are both indefinite. So, whenever NASA needs something, they place an order with Rocket Lab, and Rocket Lab has to make it and deliver it as needed. That's what an IDIQ contract is. So, you can think of it as a very flexible contract, a contract type that maximizes flexibility. This will go on for 5 years. So, in 2024, SpaceX, Blue Origin, and then ULA. What is ULA again? It's the joint venture between Boeing and Lockheed Martin, right? They were all included in this NSLS program. But this time, Rocket Lab has newly joined with their Neutron rocket. Since Neutron looks promising, I'm not sure if they've already secured contracts or what. But anyway, Rocket Lab is now included. And besides that, Stoke Space has also been newly selected. So for now, they're saying that from 2025 to 2029, there are plans for at least 30 missions. But I think these missions will probably be divided among the 5 companies. Earlier, how much did I say the revenue was? If you look here, I mentioned it was $5.6 billion. Rocket Lab probably won't take all of this either. It seems like these 5 companies will split it among themselves. That's what I'm thinking. Anyway, if you understand it as that, you'll get the gist of it. Now, moving on, here they start talking about the US Air Force. This is actually pretty unique. If you look here, it's called a base-to-point transportation system. So up until now, if you wanted something fast, you've loaded onto an airplane or something like that, but this is about building a base in space. So, once the Neutron is completed, they'll launch the Neutron. If you imagine the Earth, here, they'll launch it right above the Earth. Then, from the Neutron, they'll drop this kind of cargo like this, right into low Earth orbit. From low Earth orbit, it'll be spinning around the Earth at incredible speed, and they can drop it anywhere on Earth they want. So, the US Air Force is currently planning this incredibly fast and revolutionary transportation system, and Neutron has now been selected for it. Just keep that in mind. So, in the case of Neutron, it said that it can deliver up to 13,000 kilograms of cargo to low Earth orbit. This is scheduled for after 2026. So, it would be good to remember this as well, and keep an eye on the rocket. Now, regarding Neutron, the Stage 2 qualification has been completed. So, you know, their fuel tank. They're showing that it has now passed the test. If you look at the picture here, this part you see is probably Stage 1. This is Stage 2, and this is where the payload goes into the launch vehicle. But anyway, you can consider that the tank that goes in here has now completed its qualification testing. Next, the Hungry Hippo we talked about, it's opening its mouth like this, and they're currently testing it like this. So, this isn't finished yet. The qualification is still underway. What I was curious about is, they labeled this as Stage 1 here, but I don't really know why it's called Stage 1. If we're talking about a rocket, Stage 1 is actually here. But I don't know what they mean by Stage 1 here. So if anyone knows about this, please let me know. Let's move on. So, they're now trying out the assembly of the Neutron rocket as well. Just for your reference, they're assembling this part, and this part. Now. And in Virginia, they're preparing to launch the Neutron, and they're currently building the launch pad as well. So, a lot of R&D costs are going into this too, and it seems like expenses are really piling up. That's why, if you look at today's stock price, it dropped by almost 11 or 12%. So, I think the reason the stock dropped today is probably because, when they gave their guidance, it showed that next quarter's performance isn't expected to improve noticeably, and there's no real improvement in their cash burn rate either. I just wanted to share my thoughts on this as well. So, they're actually building a launch pad right now too. Let's move on. Next, they're also testing the Archimedes engine that goes into the Neutron, and apparently it has doubled the capacity. They used to test at just one site before, but now they've built another one, so they're testing at twice the speed. You might want to keep that in mind as well. So, the Neutron will have a total of 10 engines. For now, 9 of those will be Archimedes engines. And on the upper stage, there will be one Archimedes engine, optimized for vacuum, so that's another thing to keep in mind. They've also made a nice illustration showing how the Neutron will progress all the way to the launch pad, but as you can see, there are still some things like this. The white dots mean they're still pending. These are things that haven't been done yet. The green dots and blue dots show the current status. Oh, green means it's all finished, blue means it's in progress, and the white ones are things that will be done in the future. So if you look here, there's a static fire and a wet dress rehearsal, and I've organized a simple explanation of what these are. As for what's coming up next, well, whether it's next quarter or the one after that, they're going to do a static fire test. So they actually set the rocket up on the launch pad, then they ignite the engine. The purpose of this static test, or static fire, is to check if there are any vibrations or instabilities detected during the engine burn. It also allows them to verify the integrated system between the rocket and the launch pad. To put it simply, it's like when you put a car in park. Start the engine and press the gas pedal, the car doesn't move, but the engine revs up. It's kind of like that. It's basically the same as an engine test. You can think of it that way, and then the next thing they'll do later is the wet dress rehearsal. They don't ignite the engine at this stage, but what they do here is actually fill the rocket with fuel just like in a real launch. So they load the fuel, cool it down, and check if there are any issues with the pressurization system. Basically, they're testing the operation of the entire system in real time. They also try out automatic aborts and things like that. Next, they also test how to respond in case of an emergency, making sure everything is properly set up. For those situations, this is what's called a wet test, though the term wet sounds a bit odd in Korean. It's called wet because it's a wet dress rehearsal. So, I've made this table simple and easy to compare. So if you capture it and refer to it later, I think it'll be really helpful. Alright, next is section 3. This section is about space systems, and here they talk about rockets and everything else related to launches. Now, they've announced that they're going to acquire a German company. So, I'm not really sure how to pronounce this. I don't know if it's Mineric or Mineric, but anyway, they've decided to acquire this company. Let me try reading this out loud. It says here that it's a German optical communications technology company. So, they announced this on March 11, 2025. At first, it was a non-binding. What does that mean? It means they submitted documents that aren't legally binding or enforceable. So, they said they're going to buy it for $75 million. Oh, and just for your information, they currently have about $330 million in cash in short-term investments. So, whether they'll pay for this in cash or with common stock isn't clear yet, but just keep in mind that this is their plan. But it looks like what they're making now is probably this Condor 3 Malawian Kwacha. The picture you see here is it. This is an optical device that enables communication between satellites, and they're currently developing this optical communication terminal. But now, with this acquisition, Rocket Lab is currently working with the SDA, that is, the European Space Agency, or rather, the European Space Development Agency. Actually, this SDA is an organization under the US Space Force, and it seems that Rocket Lab is already providing satellites, the first satellites, to them. But now, it seems like they're saying that they'll go as far as manufacturing the optical equipment themselves, and provide everything completely on their own. So for now, since SDA has so many large projects, I personally think that if they successfully acquire this company, the partnership between Rocket Lab and SDA will become even stronger. And beyond that, there's even more significance to this. If you look at it, they mention in the conference call that this is Rocket Lab's first entry into Europe. Now, the European side, the European Space Agency, is a very closed market. So if we acquire this German company, it's not just about selling satellite terminals, it opens up opportunities to supply a variety of products to the European market. To participate in large-scale European programs, having a local presence is essential, and this acquisition could serve as a sort of forward base for that. It means it could become a forward base in Europe. That's what they're saying. So then, are you expecting revenue from the space systems sector in Europe? Or are you expecting revenue from the rocket launch sector? When asked this, here's how they respond. Most of it will come from the space systems sector, so it seems like they won't be doing launches in Europe. Instead, they'll be selling something there, probably components or parts. That's why they said during the conference call that the revenue will likely come from the space systems sector, so I just wanted to share that briefly. Ah, my throat hurts. Hold on a second. Let me just have some coffee. Would you like a drink? Alright, next up is something called Slate Light, which is about vertical integration. It's a term I really like. Vertical integration basically means integrating everything vertically within the company. So instead of outsourcing and bringing in parts from other places, they're saying they'll handle everything themselves, starting from making even the smallest components. That's why, you can see here, there are even parts from Mina.Direction, too. So these guys are building satellites, and now they're saying they'll even make this part themselves. Right now, there's something called the SDA tranche, which is about deploying satellites all over the Earth. I explained this before, but it seems like they're targeting the SDA, mass-producing satellites, and even enabling communication with them. Doesn't it look like that's what they're aiming for? That's just my personal opinion, but I think they're trying to create a large satellite constellation. Through this, it seems like they want to do something similar to SpaceX, and the reason this is possible is because the Neutron is now being developed. The Neutron can now carry a payload of almost 16,000 kilograms, and they're planning to load it up with a huge number of satellites, and, just like SpaceX, launch their own satellites into space. So, I think it would be good to keep in mind that they've made these kinds of statements. Right now, the companies launching the most rockets are Rocket Lab and, of course, SpaceX, but it made me wonder if maybe, just maybe, Rocket Lab could become a company that can deploy as many satellites as SpaceX. Alright, next, what is this? Third Pioneer spacecraft. If you zoom in here, you can see it says W3 spacecraft. Who are they working with on this? They say they're carrying the Varda capsule back to Earth. Next, this is actually their third mission, but they probably did the first and second missions with these guys too. I haven't seen those myself, and they say they're currently preparing for the fourth mission as well. So what is this all about? Alright, let's take a look. So, to explain Rocket Lab's W3 mission, it was launched on March 14, 2025. Now, they're bringing it back from space to Earth. They're going to recover it again in May 2025. But what exactly are they recovering? They're recovering the capsule. It's a capsule that weighs about 120 kilograms. And what are they making in this microgravity environment? They're making medicine. They're producing pharmaceuticals. It's similar to what Redwire is doing with their PharmaBox. This mission is basically serving the same purpose. So, there are even photos of this. This is the capsule that orbited in space and then returned to Earth. Inside, there could be pharmaceuticals produced in microgravity, and I understand. They also carry out other missions as well. Anyway, I think that's a good way to sum it up. So, for example, they're saying that the heat shield used here was developed by NASA. Anyway, that was the W3 mission, and the W4 mission is currently underway. If you look here, if you type Oken on YouTube, for example, you can see how this is launched and how it's recovered, so I'll just put the link in the description and you can check it out there. Also, besides these things, they're talking about expanding their product line and creating a wider variety of products, including making satellites. Next, they're making communication equipment hardware, and they're also developing software that enables communication between Earth and satellites. As they mentioned this, I prepared some information about it as well. Since I wasn't familiar with this, I did some research and found out that they acquired a company called Solero Technologies in 2022. What do these guys make? Well, it's a space solar power technology company. They manufacture solar panels, and they also produce solar cells. So, looking at where their products are used, it turns out they're currently used by NASA, the Department of Defense, and even in the James Webb Space Telescope. They're also part of NASA's Artemis Lunar Exploration Program. And you know the Ingenuity Mars helicopter, right? They're a highly recognized company that made the solar panels and solar cells used in those missions, and it turns out they were acquired in 2022. So, with their technology, when we build satellites, how do we generate power for them? In the end, it's done with solar panels, right? So, just keep in mind that they're now using this technology to make satellites as well. I think it's good to remember that. Alright, now we've reached the financials. We're almost done, but let's also take a look at the outlook. There are some reasons why the stock price dropped here, but this time, their revenue came out to $120 million. But this figure has increased compared to the same period last year. It went up by 32.1%, but compared to the previous quarter, it dropped a bit, about 7.4%. Now, the reason seems to be that the launch costs have gone down a bit. When they sign contracts, they get paid for launching, right? They're saying that because the price for that was lower, their revenue dropped a bit. Next, there's satellite manufacturing. They make satellites. They make them for MDA and SDA. MDA is a company based in Canada, and as I mentioned earlier, SDA is the Space Development Agency. They build satellites for the US Space Force under that agency, but it seems like the schedule got delayed a bit. So they mentioned that their revenue dropped a bit, and I think it would be good for you to keep that in mind. And just to give you a heads up, they said the next guidance is expected to be around $135 million. It would be good to keep that in mind as well. Currently, they're saying that their backlog stands at $1.067 billion. So, if you look at the backlog orders, last time it was about 49 to 51, roughly a 50-50 split between commercial, private companies, and government sectors. But recently, the backlog from private companies, which is shown in red, has increased and now makes up a larger portion. So, more private companies are now seeking out Rocket Lab than government clients. This is also a noticeable change. It would be good to keep this in mind as well. Now, next is operating expenses. As I mentioned several times earlier, R&D costs are a significant part of operating expenses. Most of these are related to Neutron, specifically what's called Neutron development spending. Then there's the Archimedes engine, and also building the tank prototype. These are areas where a lot of money is being spent now, and will continue to be spent in the future, as mentioned in the conference call. And then, as for purchases of properties, they've also bought some land. They also bought some equipment, just regular machinery, and then they purchased software as well. But what is all this being used for? It turns out, it's all because of Neutron. So, they keep saying that a lot of money is being spent because of Neutron, and that a lot more will be spent in the future. So, just keep that in mind. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the outlook is between $130 and $140 million, and the gross margin isn't changing much either. And the operating expenses aren't really going down. In fact, they're actually increasing a bit. They said they're going to spend even more money. And the pre-tax operating profit isn't changing much either. It's a net loss. It's not a profit. They said the loss will be between $28 and $30 million. So, they basically said that the spending and financial situation this quarter and next quarter will be pretty much the same. So currently, they have about $430 million in funds. They burned through about $60 million this quarter. So, we can think that they have about 7 quarters left. For example, if they successfully launch Neutron in 2025, I personally think that with this amount of money, there shouldn't be any problem funding the Neutron launch. But looking at it in the long term, I think that $430 million might not be enough for them. Even if it's not next year, I think they could run short on cash the year after, or even the year after that. So, for now, Rocket Lab is currently at $20.54, and today it dropped by about 11.08%. But compared to its all-time high, it hasn't fallen that much. Well, compared to companies like Redwire or Intuitive Machines, Rocket Lab is launching rockets so actively right now that its stock price doesn't seem to drop that easily. So, since it dropped by 11% today, I actually bought a bit more stock. So I was able to lower my average purchase price a bit, but anyway, I think that's about it for the summary. If you're curious about Rocket, Priars, or if anyone knows the answer to the stage 1 question I mentioned earlier, please leave a comment. Also, I'll put a link related to Barata Space in the description, so please check that out as well. My throat really hurts. I'll wrap up today's video here and come back after preparing the next company. Goodbye.